In the Exodus reading today, the Lord singles out 3 categories of person who need special protection in Jewish society: the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. Why these 3 in particular? Because they are the most vulnerable. The foreigner who comes to live among the Jews has no clan, no tribe, and therefore no legal belonging. The widow in a patriarchal society loses her status and security when she loses her husband. The orphan with both parents gone is utterly helpless. In a society where your very identity depends on ties of kinship, the orphan with no identity is often forgotten and abandoned. The stranger, the widow, the orphan. It's like a refrain running through the Old Testament. God's love, God's special care for the most vulnerable members of society, because they are the ones society is most likely to forget. It's exactly 50 years since the 1967 Abortion Act was written into UK law. In that time, nearly 9 million unborn babies have lost their lives in this country. Millions of women have been scarred by the trauma of abortion. Millions of fathers and grandparents and siblings have lost a relation without ever knowing them, and our whole culture has become complicit in denying the most fundamental right of every human being, on which every other human right depends: the right to life. This heartbreaking anniversary makes us think of the terrible vulnerability of women who have to face a difficult pregnancy, in circumstances that sometimes seem impossible, and who feel that abortion is the only way out. It makes us think of the even greater vulnerability of unborn children, who in practice have no rights and no protection, and whose lives can be terminated at the consent of their mother and 2 doctors. And it makes us think of the ongoing suffering, often hidden or unacknowledged, experienced by those who have had an abortion or been affected by one. I'm hesitant to speak about these extremely sensitive issues, but I believe that to not speak about them at this particular moment would be wrong. I know that some people feel that a man has no right to speak about abortion when the experience of an unwanted pregnancy is so far outside his comprehension. I know that many feel a Catholic priest should not speak about abortion, as if he were trying to impose Catholic dogma onto a secular society. But I'm speaking, first of all, simply as a human being. Perhaps it was possible 50 years ago to think that a fetus of 8 or 10 or 12 weeks was some kind of pre-human life form, or an appendage of the woman's body that would later form into a tiny child. But with the remarkable advances in ultrasound and 3D imaging, and with the most basic knowledge of human developmental biology, it's impossible today to think that abortion is anything less than the taking of innocent human life. A human being in its early stages of life is being killed. In the Gospel today, Jesus says you must love your neighbour as yourself. Your neighbour is both the woman facing a difficult pregnancy and the innocent child in her womb. We're called to love them both. Everyone, no matter how vulnerable they are, deserves love and protection. To sacrifice the life of one for the sake of another is a terrible wrong. This is not just a Christian conviction. It's enshrined in Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that everyone has the right, quote, to life, liberty and security of person. It's not the rights of the child versus the rights of the mother. It's the rights of both and our duty as a society to defend both. But I am also speaking as a Catholic priest, and I want you to know without any doubt what we truly believe as Catholics about life issues. And I'm going to make 3 points, and I cannot emphasise enough that if you separate these 3 points, or forget any one of them, you are betraying the Catholic position. The first point, the inalienable dignity of every human being from conception to natural death, and therefore the right to life of the unborn child. For this reason, what is technically called procured abortion, defined as the deliberate and direct killing of the human being in the womb by whatever means, is always gravely wrong. The unborn child is an innocent, defenceless human being and needs our protection. There is a tragic contradiction at the heart of our culture. We speak so much about human rights and equality. We stand up for the poor and the marginalised. We advocate for the disabled. We abhor every form of child abuse. But we don't apply any of this to the child in the womb. The poorest of the poor, the one without any voice at all, the unborn baby, is abandoned. This contradiction is most keenly felt in our health service. Those who dedicate their lives to helping others find themselves complicit in a system that takes the lives of the most vulnerable. St. John Paul II wrote, "How is it still possible to speak of the dignity of every human person when the killing of the weakest and most innocent is permitted? In the name of what justice is the most unjust of discriminations practised, where some individuals are held to be deserving of defence and others are denied that dignity?" End of quote. Many of you know the proverb, "Qui tacet consentire videtur." Silence means consent. The silence in our society about abortion is deafening. Yesterday in Oxford, many of us saw a play about Archbishop Oscar Romero, and we noticed that the turning point in his life came when he realised he could no longer remain silent about the terrible injustices that were taking place in El Salvador. I couldn't help thinking about the parallels between the suffering of the Salvadorian poor in his time and of the unborn today. The second point, and it is absolutely inseparable from the first, the right of mothers and fathers to receive every possible support to help them through difficult pregnancies. As individuals, as a church and as a society, we should recognise more honestly the sometimes overwhelming difficulties faced by pregnant women. And we should do everything possible to help them find a way through these difficulties that will avoid the tragedy of abortion. The reality is that we do not do enough as a church and as a culture and as a society. And abortion can seem like the only option for some. So many women, when they learn they are pregnant, are frightened. There are so many anxieties and pressures, even from those they love. Every pregnancy turns a woman's life upside down. An unwanted pregnancy can feel like an attack on a woman's freedom, on her very life as she understands it. An abortion can sometimes seem like a necessary act of self-defence. Why, as individuals, as a church, as a society, are we not recognising this more and doing so much more to help people know that there is another way, and actually to provide the means of finding that other way? The third point, again inseparable, is that God's mercy is infinite and unbounded, and that no one, whatever they have been through, is separated from the love of Christ or the love of his church. Jesus said, God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. The double tragedy of abortion is that it makes so many women feel cut off from God or from their faith, when it is actually the time when God's love and healing are most needed. The church is here to be a place of understanding, compassion, forgiveness and healing, not judgment. If your life has been touched in any way by abortion, know that you are loved by God. You are his beloved daughter or son. He longs for you to know his healing and mercy and the love of his church. In a strange way, it's the fact that the church speaks so seriously about abortion that allows her to have such compassion, because she understands what women have truly been through. Pope Francis has written, I quote, "I wish to restate as firmly as I can that abortion is a grave sin, since it puts an end to an innocent life. In the same way, however," he continues, "I can and must state that there is no sin that God's mercy cannot reach and wipe away when it finds a repentant heart seeking to be reconciled with the Father. The sin cries out for mercy, but the mercy isn't real without acknowledgement of the sin." I saw this myself a few years ago when I acted as a chaplain at a Rachel's Vineyard retreat for post-abortive women and men. For many of them, it was the first time they had been able to express their grief at the loss of their child and the agonizing sorrow they had carried around for so many years because of what had happened. It was because the church took their sorrow so seriously through the retreat leaders and their fellow participants that they were finally able to hand it over to God and to find healing. They could accept their child was now safe in God's hands because they could accept that they had actually conceived a child. They could stop pretending that it didn't really matter. They were, as it were, given permission to acknowledge that they were a mother and that they had carried a child. There is so much more to think about. How should we actually be reaching out to help people? What kind of legislation should we be campaigning for? How can we create a culture of life more effectively? These are incredibly complex questions, and sincere Catholics might disagree about the best way forward and the most appropriate strategies. This is natural. But what we can't disagree about, if we are trying to be faithful to Christ and his church, are those three truths: the dignity of every person and the right to life of every unborn child, whatever the circumstances. Second, the right of every mother to receive support and genuine life-giving options when facing a difficult pregnancy. And third, the mercy and healing that God wants to offer every soul through Christ and his church. I'm not telling you how to speak. You must find your own way, but there will be moments when your conscience tells you that you have a duty to speak, as long as you speak truthfully, with kindness and compassion. I'm not telling you how to speak. I guess I'm telling you who to love. To love the unborn child, to love the women you know who are facing difficult pregnancies, and to love the many, many people around you, women and men, who have been affected by the tragedy of abortion. If you are always trying to love, and only trying to love, then you will find the right words.